June 6, 1944, 5 a.m., Crispbeck Battery, Normandy coast. The binoculars trembled slightly as Oberleutnant Serdar Walter Amundsen swept them across the horizon, recording in his mind an image that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Through the pre-dawn gloom, he witnessed something that contradicted every assurance from the High Command. The English Channel, that protective moat that had shielded the Third Reich's western flank, had transformed into a steel highway, an endless armada of vessels stretching from horizon to horizon, their dark silhouettes merging into one continuous mass of approaching doom. The invasion force comprised 6,939 vessels, 1,213 warships, 4,126 landing craft, 736 ancillary craft, and 864 merchant vessels manned by over 195,000 naval personnel from 8 Allied countries. At 5:52 a.m., Amundsen's battery received the order to open fire. 3 minutes later, at 5:55 a.m., the first shells from his 210mm Czech-made Skoda cannons arced toward the invasion fleet, drops of water against an approaching tsunami. His battery engaged the U.S. cruisers USS Tuscaloosa and USS Quincy, and the battleship USS Nevada. At 6:30 a.m., his guns would claim the destroyer USS Corey, the only U.S. destroyer lost on D-Day. From his reinforced concrete observation post atop the Crispbeck Battery, the 32-year-old naval officer had just become the first German defender to sight and engage the Allied invasion of Fortress Europe. What Amundsen saw through his Zeiss rangefinder that morning was not just an invasion fleet, it was the physical manifestation of an industrial capacity that Nazi propaganda had assured him could not exist. The mathematics of defeat were sailing toward him at 8 knots. The transformation had begun. Within hours, German officers across Normandy would witness a demonstration of Allied industrial might that would shatter every assumption about their enemy's capabilities and mark the beginning of the end for Hitler's 1,000-year Reich. The darkness of June 5th had brought ominous signs. At Army Group B headquarters in La Roche-Guyon, 50 miles from the coast, Lieutenant General Hans Speidel, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal Erwin Rommel since April 15, 1944, monitored increasingly disturbing reports. Rommel himself was absent in Germany celebrating his wife's birthday, convinced the weather was too poor for any invasion attempt. At 1:20 a.m., the 7th Army received notification of massive parachute drops across Normandy. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, numbering over 13,000 men, were being delivered by Douglas C-47 Skytrains. General Artillery Erich Marx, commanding the 84th Corps from his headquarters in San Leo, understood immediately. A veteran of the Eastern Front who had lost a leg at Stalingrad, Marx possessed the tactical instinct that years of combat had honed to a razor's edge. Yet even Marx, one of the Wehrmacht's most experienced commanders, could not imagine the scale of what was approaching. The German defenders had prepared for an invasion. They had not prepared for an industrial avalanche that would bury them under sheer material superiority. Vice Admiral Friedrich Ruger, appointed as naval advisor to Rommel in November 1943, had spent months inspecting the coastal defenses. Born into a naval family in 1894, Ruger understood maritime operations better than any German officer in France. He had pressed for more mines, more obstacles, more guns. But as he would later write in his memoir, Rommel in Normandy, we were preparing to fight the last war. They were bringing the next one. The German High Command had convinced itself that the Allies could mount an invasion with perhaps 20 divisions, supported by maybe 3,000 vessels. They based these calculations on their own capabilities, their own limitations, their own experience of scarcity and increasing industrial exhaustion. After 5 years of war, as the first light of dawn crept across the Normandy coast on June 6th, German observers in bunkers and observation posts from Cherbourg to Le Havre began reporting the impossible. Not hundreds of ships, but thousands. Not a raid or a feint, but the largest amphibious invasion in human history. At strong point WN-62, overlooking what would become known as Omaha Beach, Gefreiter Heinrich Seo, peered through his machine gun's embrasure at 5:45 a.m. The 20-year-old farm boy from Metzing had never seen the ocean before being stationed in Normandy. Now he saw no ocean at all, only steel. Ships everywhere, Seo would later write in his memoir. Big ships, small ships, fat ships with flat bottoms, destroyers racing back and forth like sheepdogs. The horizon was gone. I tried to count but gave up at 100. There were thousands. Across the 50-mile invasion front, German officers and soldiers experienced the same stunning realization. They were facing not just superior numbers, but a different order of magnitude entirely. At 5:30 a.m., the naval bombardment commenced. Available to the fleet were 5 battleships, 20 cruisers, 65 destroyers, and 2 monitors. For the German defenders, it was their first lesson in American industrial mathematics. The USS Texas alone fired 255 rounds from her 14-inch guns in the first hour. Each shell weighed 1,400 pounds. In 60 minutes, one ship had delivered 178 tons of high explosives, more than many German artillery regiments possessed in total ammunition reserves. Before the first soldier set foot on the beaches, the Allied naval forces had fired approximately 50,000 shells from destroyers, 23,000 shells from cruisers, and 3,500 shells from battleships, roughly 130,000 tons of explosive ordnance. General d'Infanterie Guy Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to Commander-in-Chief West, would later testify, "We had prepared to fight soldiers. We found ourselves fighting factories." At 6 a.m., as naval shells continued to pulverize the Atlantic Wall, German defenders witnessed the second demonstration of Allied industrial superiority. The sky filled with aircraft, not dozens or hundreds, but thousands. Allied air forces flew over 14,000 sorties in support of the landings, having secured air supremacy prior to the invasion. The Luftwaffe had approximately 300 operational aircraft in all of France. On D-Day, they managed 319 sorties. The Allies flew 14,674. For every German plane in the air, there were 46 Allied aircraft. The mathematics were not just unfavorable, they were absurd. Major Josef Prill, commanding Jagdgeschwader 26, made the only Luftwaffe attack on the invasion beaches that morning. With just his wingmen, Hinz Wodacek, he strafed Sword Beach once before fleeing from dozens of Allied fighters. This famous incident, documented in multiple historical accounts, demonstrated the complete impotence of German air power. Despite the overwhelming firepower arrayed against them, German defenders at certain positions initially believed they might hold. At Omaha Beach, the 352nd Infantry Division occupied excellent defensive positions on bluffs overlooking the beach. Machine guns in concrete bunkers created interlocking fields of fire. The first waves of American infantry from the 1st and 29th Divisions walked into a slaughter. From the moment the Americans hit the beach at 6:30 a.m., machine gun fire erupted from the resistance nests. Hinrich Seo, manning an MG-42 machine gun at Widerstands Nest 62, fired over 12,000 rounds that morning, a documented fact from his own testimony. He watched American soldiers fall by the dozens, by the hundreds. Bodies floated in the surf. The beach turned red with blood. For a brief moment, it seemed the Atlantic Wall might hold. Then the destroyers came. At approximately 8 a.m., with the situation on Omaha Beach critical and General Omar Bradley considering evacuation, something unprecedented occurred. American destroyers, ignoring the risk of grounding or mines, closed to within 1,000 yards of the beach, point-blank range for naval guns. The USS McCook, USS Carmack, USS Doyle, and USS Frankfurt turned their 5-inch guns on individual German strongpoints. At such range, they couldn't miss. This action, well documented in naval records, proved decisive in breaking the German defense at Omaha Beach. This was the moment German officers began to understand the true meaning of American industrial might. It wasn't just the number of ships, it was the willingness to risk them, to use them as expendable assets. The destroyer USS Corey was lost, but immediately others took its place. Ships were not precious, irreplaceable assets as they were for the Kriegsmarine. They were tools, and America had thousands more. As the morning progressed, German officers witnessed something that defied their understanding of amphibious operations. The landing craft kept coming, wave after wave, hour after hour, an endless conveyor belt of men and material flowing from sea to shore. The variety of specialized vessels stunned German observers. Landing craft tank LCTs discharged 30-ton Sherman tanks directly onto the beaches. Landing ship tank LSTs, massive vessels 328 feet long, beached themselves and opened bow doors to discharge entire tank companies. Duck amphibious trucks swam ashore, drove up the beach, and delivered supplies directly to combat units. By nightfall, the Allies had landed approximately 156,000 troops, 132,715 by sea, and 23,400 airborne. This force exceeded the entire German 7th Army defending Normandy. In the first 24 hours, the documented Allied achievement included 156,000 personnel, 20,000 vehicles, 17